Do you see those cute little jaws swinging their arms and having the time of their lives out there? Who would even dare to lay a finger on them? But since this is a From Software game, what if I told you that they've been subjected to a terrible genocide? Some of the most horrific atrocities imaginable were actually committed against them. In our previous investigation, we established that even in a world like Elden Ring, which is arguably the brightest and most lighthearted game From Software has ever produced, has a collection of pretty horrifying creatures. We saw how these monsters were the direct results of anomalies. We also witnessed the tragedy of artificial life, observing how beings engineered by human hands were the ones suffering the most due to society literally treating them like garbage bags. However, these are just the surface of the abominations we saw in the last video. In this second chapter, we will examine the torture devices used by the Inquisitors in Mount Gelmir, the tragic fates of those born without the blessings of the Erd Tree, and finally, we will look at the Jar People. They look pretty innocent from the outside. Cute little goofy creatures. But again, what if I told you that they hide some of the most horrifying lore in the lands between? So here we are again, and to truly understand these beings, we must once more read their item descriptions, look around the environments they reside in, look into their anatomies, and figure out their tragedies. In Liurnia of the Lakes, on a small landmass south of the Raya Lucaria Academy, you can find Patches casually squatting by the campfire. He will talk to you about a few different things, but eventually, he drops an insane piece of information regarding a secret route.
Making your way to the Erd Tree, no? Well, I heard something that might help. A special means of reaching your destination. Have you ever seen an Iron Virgin? The clunky contraptions are whirlwinds of sickles and spiked wheels. But long ago, they were endowed with a spell of transposition. And get this, a surviving virgin sits at the bottom of the big water wheel in the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Its transpositional powers fully intact. So right, if you get caught in it on purpose, it'll chuck you out straight at the base of the Erd Tree. Or so I'm told.
Right off the bat, this description sounds like something pulled straight from a horror movie. He surprisingly knows about this specific machine in a very isolated part of the Academy. Patches has a vast knowledge of the world, but this detail reveals his true allegiances. Patches works for Volcano Manor, so it might be a potential way to recruit, but it's kind of a pretty brutal way to do so. You can technically talk to Raya and do her quest there, and then you can receive your invitation to the Volcano Manor, and if you potentially make your way to the top of the Altus Plateau by taking the Grand Lift of Dectus, then Raya will immediately transport you to the Volcano Manor.
I've been waiting for you. I knew you had the stuff of champions. I hereby invite you to the Volcano Manor. Take my hand and have audience with my mistress. Give me your hand. I will pray that you follow the same path as Lady Tanith.
And I think that it is a more pleasant route that I would follow, but anyways, following this advice, your Tarnished makes their way through the Academy and jumps onto the massive water wheel elevator. Instead of riding it up, you let it transport you down into the dark cavern at the very bottom. Immediately after dropping from the water elevator into the shallow water, you are confronted by a massive construct. In my first playthrough, this machine instantly opened the chambers on its chest, extending two massive arm-like contraptions to grab you and process you inside. What a wonderful first-time confrontation. Looking closer, you realize exactly how detailed this entity is. It is a highly decorated machine. The chassis is covered in intricate patterns, heavily painted and etched by artisans who took twisted pride in their craft. Near the waist, several golden snakes wrap around the entire length of the body. The shoulder pads share this distinct snake-scale texture, heavily reminiscent of Praetor Rykard, the master who turned himself into a giant serpent. This raises a fundamental question. Is this a creature or a machine? Well, by definition, it is an automaton. It is an iron construct operating on wheels, immune to all biological status effects like poison, hemorrhage, and scarlet rot, while retaining a severe weakness to lightning, which is logical as it's technically made out of metal, and metals are good conductors of electricity. However, when the metal doors snap open during a grab attack, the inner cage reveals stacked layers of flayed skin and meat from past victims. The grabbing mechanism itself is a tangled mass of living grey-colored serpents. A mass of snakes are bundled together to form the reaching arms, while others coil around the inner machinery, acting as a living biological engine. It is a snake-powered Iron Maiden. The exterior disguise is just as unsettling. The metal face belongs to a porcelain maiden, but it looks incredibly sad, as if the face itself is actively crying. Just below this face, two tiny metal hands cradle a small baby. Why is this contraption officially named an abductor virgin? And why does the torture machine feature a weeping mother holding an infant? The title of Virgin and the overall design points directly to Lady Tanith, the ruling proprietress of Volcano Manor. Tanith was fiercely devoted to Rykard. The title of Virgin likely refers to the fact that she was childless, similar to the historical Virgin Queen Elizabeth I. Because Rykard changed his physical form into a monstrous snake, Tanith could never consummate her marriage or bear the children she wanted, which led her to adopt Raya. The sad face and the lifeless baby represents the children she could never have. The abdomen of the machine, filled with inhospitable snakes and blood, serves as a representation of her barren womb. However, there is a much darker theory attached to this design. At the end of Volcano Manor, Patches hands you the dancer's castanets.
Oh, you again. A shame you had to see me like this. I had a bit of a slip-up, that's all. I should have stuck to what I know best. No matter. I know I can trust you. Gullible, yes, but a good soul. Make certain that Tanith gets this. Oh, it's nothing, it's just... makes me sick to see her all bent out of shape. Come on, Tanith, back on your high horse where you belong.
An item belonging to Tanith from her past. In our real world, castanets have ancient roots in the Phoenician civilization. The Phoenicians famously worshipped deities like Baal and a goddess named Tanith. They sustained these gods through extreme blood sacrifices, explicitly including the sacrifice of children. The remains of these victims were stored in burial sites called tophets, which visually resemble the chaotic graveyards filled with urns and living jars across the lands between. The weeping face of the Virgin might represent deep remorse for Tanith's role in the horrific blood sacrifices required to feed the Volcano Manor's separate deity. The abductor virgins were originally designed with the intent of capturing victims alive for interrogation and torture. We know exactly who outfitted them with their horrific weapons by reading the item descriptions. In Giza Wheel, it has been mentioned. Great iron wheel lined with flesh-flaying blades. Device of torture used by Inquisitor Giza. As the wheel spins, it causes severe pain and blood loss. The design was adopted for use as the iconic weapon wielded by the Iron Virgins. Item descriptions from Inquisitors Gerendol mentioned: instrument of torture used on nobles behind the curtain at the Volcano Manor of Mount Gelmir. Its numerous spikes pierce the flesh, then singe the wounds with flame. The smell of burnt blood induces despair in the victim. A candlestick conceived by a thorough mind. Inquisitor Giza perfected these torture tools in the subterranean Inquisition chamber beneath the manor, eventually scaling them up to build full-sized automatons. These machines were dispatched to very specific locations outside Volcano Manor. We find them at Carrier Manor, the Raya Lucaria Academy, and Redmane Castle. They were placed there to abduct high-value test subjects, Albinorics, sorcerers, and strong warriors. The grab attack exists to solely transport victims to the manor for torture. Long ago, these machines were endowed with a spell of transposition. They were designed to grab a target, crush them within the living snake engine, and magically transport their remains straight into Mount Gelmir's underground torture complex. Today, most virgins have lost their magic, so their grab simply constricts the target and spits out their blood. But the one surviving virgin beneath the Academy water wheel retains its power, functioning exactly as the Inquisition intended. To truly grasp the horror of the abductor virgins, we have to look directly at the man who authorized their construction, Peter Rykard. The machines are sick and twisted, but they did not build themselves. I honestly feel like they are the exact manifestations of Rykard himself and his own descent into depravity. Before the shattering, Rykard was not a monster, or at least, not outwardly. He was the son of Radagon and Queen Renala, later elevated to a demigod when his father married Queen Marika. Under the Golden Order, Rykard served as a ruthless justiciar. The Golden Order presented itself as a flawless society, but maintaining that perfect image required someone to do the bloody work in the shadows. Rykard was that man. He commanded a company of inquisitors whose sole purpose was to persecute, interrogate, and ruthlessly torture anyone considered a heretic. This is exactly why the abductor virgins were originally built. Rykard used these machines to round up outcasts, specifically targeting artificial beings like the Albinorics, subjecting them to horrific pain simply because they fell outside the Earth Tree's grace. But a massive anomaly arises when we look at how the Virgins operate today. If these machines were built to enforce the laws of the Golden Order, why are they now actively hunting the Earth Tree's own forces? The answer lies in the shattering. When the Elden Ring was broken, the demigods went to war over miserly scraps of power. Rykard was completely disgusted by this. He viewed the Earth Tree and the Greater Will as inherently corrupt. He decided that if the gods were willing to tear the world apart for their own greed, he would completely reject them. He launched a blasphemous campaign against the capital, drawing thousands of followers known as the Recusants, who genuinely admired his rebellious ambitions. During this war, Rykard relocated to the volcanic Mount Gelmir, where he discovered the ancient serpent. Realizing that his human form was not strong enough to defeat the Greater Will, Rykard made a terrifying choice. Deep inside the volcano lived the god-devouring serpent, an entity that predated the Erd Tree. Rykard intentionally fed himself along with his great rune directly to the beast. He merged his consciousness with the snake, believing that by devouring champions, he could grow large enough to eventually consume the gods themselves. That's the reason why he is also technically known as Rykard, Devourer of the Gods. This merging completely shattered his mind. Whatever noble intentions Rykard had were instantly replaced by gluttony. This brings us to the most disturbing question. Why does Rykard continue to torture his victims? If he just wants to eat them, why keep the Inquisitors and the abductor virgins running? Before the serpent, torture was a political tool used to extract information and punish heretics. But after the merging of Rykard with the serpent, the torture became something entirely different. It became a twisted ritual of preparation. The lore tells us that the smell of burnt blood and the pain inflicted by the weapons like the Inquisitor's Durandal were specifically designed to induce absolute despair in the victim. They broke their victims psychologically and physically, so that when they were finally fed to the serpent, they were completely devoid of hope. So basically, whatever they did was mostly out of sport and fun, and their intentions were not the most rational, to say the least. This gluttony led to the ultimate betrayal of his own men. The soldiers who joined Rykard to fight against the Erd Tree suddenly found themselves serving a mindless, hungry monster. Acts of cannibalism became a sickening reality across the Mount Gelmir battlefields. Rykard stopped fighting alongside his champions and simply started eating them. Inside the bowels of the serpent, these digested warriors became a horrific writhing mass of flesh. This is what Rykard means when he asks you to join the Serpent King as family. By that, he meant you are being digested and you will eventually join the family of people he has already digested. His original forces were so horrified by what he had become that they completely abandoned him.
Someone please kill him. That horrendous serpent. Praetor Rykard.
Some even left behind a weapon, the serpent hunter's spear, in his throne room, praying that a warrior would eventually arrive to put their disgraced lord out of his misery. The depravity did not stop at cannibalism. Rykard initiated a series of repellent birthing rituals. He forced women, most notably a figure known as Daedakar, to bear the deformed offspring of the snake, resulting in the creation of the man-serpents that currently patrol the manor. When you piece all of this together, the abductor virgins make more sense. These monsters are special, as most of what you have seen throughout all of our Investigating Creatures series are creatures that have gone completely insane due to something or the other. They have deformed into abysmal creatures. They have lost their human features and rationality. But the abductor virgin is something that is completely man-made. They did not go through any transformations. They were simply made for torture purposes. But man, every time that iron chest opens, it never fails to give me some pretty horrifying memories and what is perceived as a pretty bright From Software game. When you measure pure visual horror, the omens might not immediately top the list compared to multi-limbed revenants or mechanical torture devices. They are slow, heavy-set, and lumbering. But when you break down their history, their biology, and the sheer cruelty inflicted upon them, The Omen possesses arguably the most horrifying and deeply tragic backstory in the entire game. They are the ultimate victims of a deeply prejudiced society. To truly understand the tragedy of the Omens, we first need to look closely at their anatomy, and the best way to do this is by examining Morgott. When you strip away the ragged cloak Morgott wears at Margit, you can see exactly how heavily this curse alters human biology. His frame is unnaturally thick, supported by dense, heavy bones, and his entire body is inhumanly muscular. His face is extremely wrinkled and worn. This tells us a crucial detail. Omens age just like humans do. As one of Queen Marika and Godfrey's first children, Morgott is incredibly old. He retains the ashen grey hair iconic to his father's lineage, but that is where his human features end. Massive, jagged horns erupt chaotically from his head, back, and shoulders. But the most jarring feature is his tail. Humans evolved to lose their tails entirely, yet the Omens regrow them. Morgott possesses a massive, thick tail covered in sharp horns at the tip, making it heavily resemble a scorpion stinger. After you defeat Morgott at the base of the Erd-tree, the curse is finally lifted from his body. If you look at his corpse, it is significantly shrunk in size. All the massive musculature, the tail, and the chaotic horns, they are completely gone. What is left behind is a frail, normal human body. He was always meant to be a normal human, but he was trapped inside an Omen's body.
None may claim the title of Elden Lord. Thy deeds shall be met with failure, just as I.
His tragedy is best summarized by the remembrance of the Omen King. Though born one of the graceless Omen, Morgott took it upon himself to become the Erd-tree's protector. He loved not in return, for he was never loved, but nevertheless, love it he did. This brings us to his twin brother, Mohg.
Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty.
Despite sharing the exact same parents and the exact same curse, their physical appearances and ideologies are drastically different. Unlike his brother, Mohg's skin is pitch black. While Morgott's horns grow randomly, Mohg's horns are thick, heavily ridged, and tightly curled like a mountain goat's. The most brutal detail of Mohg's design is that a massive horn has just curled and grown into his eye, completely damaging it and making him blind from that side. His teeth are very vampire-like, sharp and pointy. He possesses massive, black feathered wings. Furthermore, Mohg actually has 6 fingers on his left hand. The third finger is a stiff, solid claw that he specifically uses to cast blood flame talons. Why do these twins look so different? The answer is in how they reacted to their trauma. Morgott sealed his cursed blood inside his sword. Mohg did the opposite. Mohg's great rune tells us exactly why, but Mohg's rune is soaked in accursed blood, from his devout love for the wretched Maya that he was born into far below the earth. Mohg completely severed his ties to his mother's religion, which is the Greater Will and the Golden Order. After that, he made contact with an outer god known as the Formless Mother. But investigating Mohg introduces a massive anomaly. Why are there 2 of him? You fight the Lord of Blood at Morgwyn Palace, but if you navigate the Lanedale sewers, you fight Mohg the Omen at the bottom of a deep elevator shaft. From a lore perspective, this is a magical protection. Just as Morgoth projects the illusion of Margit outside Stormvale, Mohg left a projection in the sewers to aggressively guard the hidden path to the Three Fingers. Interestingly, this shows a rare moment of the twins cooperating. Mohg places a projection, and Morgoth places a magical seal behind it, both working to prevent anyone from reaching the frenzied flame. But looking at the game's internal data gives a different answer. Hidden audio files reveal that Miquella originally had a much more active speaking role, including cut dialogue intended for Millennia's boss fight. This implies the storyline of Mohg kidnapping Miquella was a late addition in the files. The sewer Mohg model is labeled Greater Demon. It is highly likely this sewer encounter was designed for a generic omen boss, but when From Software rewrote the story, they repurposed the Greater Demon slot into a projection of Mohg. And Mohg's grand plan is far more pathetic than it seems. He wanted to elevate Miquella to godhood. He tells the player, "Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty." But dialogue from Sir Ansbach reveals a horrifying truth about Miquella.
Miquella the Kind is a monster, pure and radiant. He wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
Mohg was charmed. He was unknowingly enchanted by Miquella the entire time. When Mohg dies, his death pose is visually identical to the heart-stolen animation the player suffers in the DLC. Mohg was never going to be a consort. Miquella just wanted his strong, empty corpse to be used as a flesh vessel to resurrect Radahn. This brings us to the common omens found wandering the world and how society handles this curse. There are two distinct types of normal omen enemies. The one guarding the sewers of Leyndell are massive and covered in undisturbed horns. These are the omens born to royalty. Shedding royal blood is a strict taboo, so their horns are left intact. However, we learn their true fate from the regal omen, Ben. Omen babies born of royalty do not have their horns excised, but instead are kept underground unbeknownst to anyone, imprisoned for eternity. These memorial fetishes are fashioned in secret. The omens you encounter on the surface look vastly different. Their horns have been violently amputated, leaving bleeding stumps across their skin. These are children born to commoners. The Omen Burn item describes this horror. Omen babies have all their horns excised, causing most to perish. These fetishes are made to memorialize them. Please don't hate me or curse me. Please. The original Japanese text refers to these items as misbegotten. In real-world Japanese Buddhism, misbegotten kuyo is a memorial service specifically held for miscarried or stillborn children. Fetishes are carved to comfort the soul of the dead child. In Elden Ring, an omen baby is considered practically dead the moment it is born. The few common omens that survive this amputation are treated like disposable garbage. During times of war, they are conscripted and used as shock troops. The Golden Order gives them the Omen Cleaver, but it is a trap. The item states, "The pattern etched upon the blade is the remnant of a deteriorating malediction. Indeed, when bestowing a weapon, preparations must be made for taking it away." The Golden Order intentionally cursed the metal so it would eventually break, ensuring that the omens could be easily disarmed and slaughtered if they rebelled. To enforce this cruelty, the Golden Order employs the Omen Killers. The very first Omen Killer was a famous perfumer named Rollo. The Omen Killer Rollo ashes reveal Rollo imbibed a physic to rid himself of emotion. thus enabling him to enact his nightmarish labor hunting the omen. Rollo was a doctor. He could not stomach the atrocities he was ordered to commit while sober, so he chemically killed his own empathy. The omen killer robe calls them butchers of twisted conscience. They wield great omen killer cleavers, which the game describes as comprising a row of amputated omen horns. They weaponize the victims to slaughter them, possibly as a way to mock them. Even worse is the mask that they wear. The omen smirk mask states, "Bears the smirking face of an elder twisted in wicked delight. This visage is carved in the image of the evil spirits that haunt the omen in their nightmares. If you find an omen sleeping, they are writhing and convulsing in horrific night terrors. The executioners wear the exact faces of those night terrors, using psychological trauma to paralyze them with fear before cutting them down. What exactly are these spirits, and what is the actual nature of the omen curse? To understand this, we have to look at the Dung Eater. The Dung Eater despises the living and wants to infect the entire world with the omen curse. He does this by murdering people and defiling their corpses. The Seedbird curse confirms his exact process. Curse grown on a corpse killed and defiled by the Dung Eater. A tender pox afflicted with omen horns. The Dung Eater cultivates the Seedbird curse on corpses. By doing so, he prevents dead souls from returning to the Erd Tree, leaving them forever cursed. The Dung Eater's process is heavily inspired by the Japanese folklore of the Kappa creatures that steal the Shirikodama, a mythical ball containing a human soul located inside the victim's anus. The Dung Eater rips the souls out of his victims, physically denying them a return to the Erd Tree. This tells us exactly what the omen curse is. The Golden Order is a closed ecosystem where souls return to the Erd Tree roots to be reborn. An omen is someone whose soul is completely disconnected from the Erd Tree. This is why they are haunted. They are surrounded by wraiths, the vengeful spirits of those who died cursed. The wraith calling bell explicitly states, "Wraiths are said to be the vengeful spirits of those who died when cursed." Royal omens can actually weaponize these restless spirits, spitting golden brown cursed fire, but the cost is eternal torment. So why are the omens born with these features? We have to look at the realm of shadow. In the shadow realm, horns are a sign of apex divinity. Before Marika established the Erd Tree, the ruling power was the Horn Scent. They built their society around the crucible, which the aspects of the crucible incantation described as the Erd Tree's primal vital energies, where all life was once blended together. The Crucible Knot talisman explains how history rewrote this. A vestige of the crucible of primordial life, it was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. The Hornsent believed they were a chosen people. They built massive spiral towers, mimicking the normalized current of the crucible, desperately trying to reach the heavens. And to build their divine gateway, they needed flesh. Marika belonged to a hornless race known as the Shaman. The Hornsent subjected the Shaman to unimaginable atrocities. A Hornsent phantom in the whipping heart explicitly states their fate. They were whipped until their flesh ripened, then stuffed alive into massive jars alongside criminals to melt together into a living mass. The arrogant Hornsent believed they were doing the Shaman a favor, elevating them to nigh sainthood. When Marika finally reached the Gate of Divinity, she orchestrated a massive crusade to wipe the Hornsent out. Under her new Golden Order, those born with horns, which were the sacred symbol of her abusers, were immediately classified as abominations. But as Marika's forces burned the Hornsent towers, the Hornsent Grandam issued a final hex. She screams.
A curse upon the strumpet's progeny, upon Marika's children, each and all. The curse of the omen shall strike thee down in the form of the sacred beasts.
This is the horrifying truth of the omens. Marika's hatred for the omens is born from the deepest trauma imaginable. She was forced to give birth to twins who bore the exact physical features of the monsters who tortured her people. Rather than break the cycle, she threw her own children into the sewers. To get the complete picture of the prejudice running through the land between, we cannot just stop at the omens. To truly understand how deeply this hatred runs, we have to look at their evolutionary cousins, a group of creatures who share the exact same tragic origins, the misbegotten. If you look closely at Morgoth and Mohg, you see the remnants of the crucible in their scales, their tails, and Mogh's massive wings. Now look at the misbegotten. They possess all of these exact same physical traits, but dialed up to the absolute extreme. They are walking, breathing chimeras. They have long reptilian tails, bodies covered in coarse hair and uneven scales, and wings that allow them to aggressively close the distance in combat. Even their dental structure is a chaotic mess. When you kill them, they drop an item called the Old Fang. A description is crucial. A rarely seen specimen of beast fang. These multiple overlapping fangs grow from a single root. Perhaps they are the vestige of the primordial crucible. Just like the omens, the misbegotten are physical expressions of the crucible, which is like an ancient melting pot where all life was blended together. They are defined by vestigial growths, unnecessary limbs, and just chaos throughout their anatomies. But while the omens are viewed as a terrified curse that must be violently amputated or hidden away in the sewers, the Golden Order found a much more dramatic, cruel use for the misbegotten. The winged misbegotten ashes tells us exactly how society treats them. The misbegotten are held to be a punishment for making contact with the crucible, and from birth, they are treated as slaves or worse. In Marika's perfect world, simply being born with mixed blood is considered a primal sin. Because they look more bestial than human, they are completely stripped of their autonomy. They are the backbone of the manual labor force across the lands between and are treated with absolute disgust by the ruling class. We see the peak of this horrific dynamic at Castle Morn, located at the very southern edge of the Weeping Peninsula. When you arrive, the castle is completely overrun. The misbegotten have slaughtered the soldiers and taken over the courtyards. But this is not a mindless monster invasion. This is an entire slave rebellion. The shattering threw the entire world into chaos, and the misbegotten finally saw a window of opportunity to violently throw off their shackles and fight for their freedom. You can feel this generational anger in the very weapons the misbegotten use. They do not fight with refined swords or elegant magic. The frontline slaves use their iron cleaver. The item description states, "Steeped in resentment, these weapons are swung wildly and relentlessly, often after rushing up to foes. Every swing they take at you is fueled by a lifetime of abuse. But the most heartbreaking chapter of the misbegotten story is found right at the very center of the player's journey. Smithing Master Hewg. When you arrive at the Round Table Hold, you find Hewg working the anvil. He is a misbegotten, but unlike the ones you fight in the wild, his ankle is physically bolted to the wall with a massive iron chain. He was personally enslaved and chained to the floor by Queen Marika herself. If you press him for information, you find him terrified, mumbling prayers for forgiveness to the very woman who imprisoned him. Hewg was cursed by Marika with an impossible task. He is bound to the hold until he forges a weapon capable of killing a god. Queen Marika established the Golden Order through the systematic eradication and enslavement of crucible-linked beings, including the omens and misbegotten. When she decides to rebel against the greater will and dismantle her own failing system, she abandons her holy knights. Instead, she enslaves Master Hewg, a misbegotten, binding him to forge a weapon capable of killing a god. Hewg directly contradicts the Order's teachings. The regime labels his kind as subhuman, yet he exhibits deep intelligence, empathy, and a featherly devotion to Rodrika. He endures his ruling labor only because the Forge provides a distraction from Marika's psychological curse. As the Erd Tree burns and the Round Table Hold disintegrates, Hewg's physical chains break. He is granted his freedom. However, years of subjugation have destroyed his mind. He ignores Rodrika's pleas to flee, entirely losing his memories and identity. His existence is reduced to a single conditioned command: finish the god-slaying weapon. In the base game, the living jars are arguably the closest thing Elden Ring has to comic relief. They are round, whimsical, and strangely endearing. When we meet Iron Fist Alexander, he explains his noble quest. He reveals the world collecting the corpses of great fallen champions, placing their remains inside his body so that their strength might live on and allow him to become a warrior vessel. Even Jarburg, a secluded village filled with peaceful flower-picking jars, paints these creatures as harmless creatures. But the shadow of the Erdtree expansion completely turns the tables. It reveals that the origin of the living jars is rooted in some of the most grotesque tortures ever seen in a From Software game. The horror begins when you descend into Bellyrat's jail. Hanging ominously from chains above a deep chasm are the familiar shapes of the jars. But the atmosphere is wrong. Something kind of feels off about this place and the jars here. As you wander the dark tunnels, you hear the final moments of a ghost begging for mercy, pleading to not be subjected to the fate of the jars. Then, you see what happens to the people trapped inside. The contents of one of the jars violently spills out onto the floor. A mass of pink oozing living flesh drags itself upright. It is a monstrosity, covered in tumorous growths, completely blindfolded, and branded with a symbol on its forehead. The creature is the inert meat. To understand exactly what these abominations are, we have to look at the primary victims of the Shadow Realm, the shamans. The shamans are a specific race of people, the very same race Queen Marika belonged to. The ruling class of the realm, the Hornsent, discovered that the flesh of the shamans possessed a unique property. Their flesh was highly malleable. It could seamlessly and harmoniously meld together with the flesh of other living creatures. The Hornsent decided to exploit this unique trait to achieve their twisted version of divinity. They believed that by taking criminals and sinners and forcefully fusing them with the pure flesh of the shamans, they could cleanse the sinners and create saints. The reality of this sainthood was just pure agony. We learned the exact methodology of the torture near the whipping hut. The Hornsent used a weapon called the Tooth Whip, a leather scourge embedded with rotting, misshapen teeth that seeped with deadly poison. The shamans were violently hunted and whipped until their flesh was open, inflamed and oozing with pus. While they were still alive, their mangled bodies were forcefully stuffed into these massive pots alongside the criminals. The jars themselves were designed to ensure absolutely zero chance of escape. They possessed magical self-mending properties. If a victim inside tried to thrash or crack the clay to break out, the pot would instantly reseal itself. Trapped in the freezing dark, the victims were left to starve with their bodies slowly melted together. The item descriptions for frozen maggots reveals the reality of their survival. The prisoners trapped inside the pots had to rely on eating the maggots that festered in their own infected wounds just to stay alive. The people physically responsible for this butchery were known as the Greater Potentates. They operated primarily outside of Bonny Village, wielding massive butcher cleavers explicitly designed to dismember human bodies to make them fit inside jars. But if you look at the Potentates, they wear a specific headpiece called the Caterpillar Mask, made entirely of solidified bugs. The law states this mask is a ritual implement used to ward off thoughts of impurity, doubt, and temptation, while they are absorbed in divine ritual. Much like the omen killers who had to drink a physic to numb their emotions before slaughtering infants, the Potentates needed a blindfold to convince themselves that chopping up living people was a not-so-bad thing to do. This brings us to the most tragic location in the entire DLC, the Shaman Village. After surviving the brutal dark landscape of the Shadow Realm, you suddenly step into a completely empty sunlit village, bathed in warm gold. The music drops out, replaced by a frail, melancholic string melody. In the center of the village is a glowing, illusory Erd tree. Queen Marika placed it there. Marika was likely the very last shaman. When she finally returned to her home, everyone was gone. Her entire race had been hunted down, whipped, and melted into living jars inside the jails. At the base of a dead tree in the village, you can find her golden braid. She cut off her hair as an offering to her grandmother, which she left behind as a souvenir for vengeance. Marika's subsequent actions are horrific, but they are entirely contextualized by this village. She organized a genocide against the Hornsent. She sent Mesmer to ban them all because they wiped her entire civilization off the map. But the most fascinating part of this lore is how Marika handled the legacy of the jars after she ascended to Godhood and established the Golden Order in the lands between. She did not destroy the jars. She subverted them. In the lands between, the jars are no longer tools of torture filled with living, suffering flesh. They are honorable vessels used for Erd Tree burial, carrying the remains of dead warriors back to the Erd Tree roots. More importantly, Marika completely redefined the word potentate. In the Shadow Realm, a potentate was a terrifying butcher wielding a massive cleaver. But in the lands between, as we learn from Jar Ben, a potentate is a gentle caretaker. The living jars of the new world want a potentate with soft, smooth hands to rub them down and keep them safe. Marika took the very title of the men who slaughtered her people and intentionally twisted it into a more gentler role. The story of the living jars is a perfect way to tell the audience that even the cutest and most whimsical creatures are not spared from the horrors and the brutalities of these lands. There are a lot more creatures we would be tackling in our future video. If you like this investigation, please don't forget to check out our previous investigation on some other equally horrifying creatures.